Good evening, everyone. For those of you that have not been to the City of Lakewood Auditorium, welcome. My name is Chris Gordon. I am the Public Works Director. We're excited to have everybody here. We are certainly very excited and very proud for this day. It has been a collaborative effort from the prior administration, the prior mayor, as well as the administration today, City Council, Mayor George, and all of the many different public works employees, as well as departments here within the city to get to this point. As a Director of Public Works, I'm very excited and proud that we are at this point. There are a lot of people to thank. Mark Papke, our city engineer, Lou McMahon, our outside counsel, along with Brown and Caldwell and CT Consultants, just to name a few, along with Mayor George and City Council with their support. So again, we're very proud to be at this point. We know there's a lot of work ahead in regards to the consent decree, but we're confident we have a good plan together and we're ready to take those next steps. So both Lou and Mark are going to be going through some slides for everybody. We'll take some questions at the end, and I'm also here for any questions as well. So again, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this beautiful day. And in February in Cleveland, and especially Lakewood, we don't get many of these, so we ran with it. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Lou and Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. As we said, I'm Lou McMahon. McMahon DeGullis is my law firm. I've had the privilege of working on these matters for 13, 14 years, and as a volunteer long before I was engaged by the city. And this is one of my favorite matters I've ever worked on in my legal career. We've ended up with a really good result. So we're here to give you some good news and to bring an update from what's been a long effort. I'd see a lot of familiar faces going back to when we had the first Clean Water Lakewood task force meetings, and we've engaged the public in this so that Lakewood could get the answer that it wanted, and that we could end up being in a strong position to tell both Ohio EPA and US EPA, who long wanted us to have a consent decree and just kind of go by the book of what we should do, that we knew what the best answer was going to be. We knew what our community needed, and that we could figure out do the most important things first in a way to keep it affordable and pay for them. So that's what we're here to talk about, and then to have an update. So everything that we're talking about is going to be available on the Clean Water Lakewood website. There's always a lot of information there, but this is just to bring everybody up to speed. For those in the auditorium, I apologize, I'm going to have to go back and forth because I know these slides, but not without seeing where the cursor takes me. So these are the topics we're going to talk about tonight. It's the agenda. We're going to talk about the federal consent decree that the city's entered into and the court has entered as just a couple weeks ago. We're going to talk about some of the projects that are almost done, in the middle of design, and that will be done soon, and some updates on those. And these are some of the big things we set out for ourselves 5 years ago and more. These are the projects to address and update our sewers and our sewer system to make it compliant with the Clean Water Act and protect our water resources. And it's on the same schedule and plan that we set out for ourselves. So you can get an update on those. Other water and sewer projects, some of what we have to do is continually be updating some of our collection system and our water system that are in the streets. Not just the big projects where the overflows are, but this has all been an effort to reinvent all of Lakewood for the 21st century, to bring just like our houses in this community that need renewal and will last 300 years if you take care of them, our sewer system needs to be updated. Our century-old sewer system needs to be updated. We'll also then talk about how you can get more information and the very big Interceptor project that's going to start this year. Now, part of our sewer system that has needed some critical, timely repair, and how the city's going forward with that project. It's going to affect, it's going to be a new spine for our whole sewer system, and it's going to take a long time to do. So, federal consent decree. There was a lot of, back in when the consent decree was filed with the federal court, there was a whole bunch of news and some talk and things, and a lot of inaccuracies got out there in a hurry. So tonight I'm just going to take a few moments and talk about what a consent decree is, why we have it, what it does for us, what it is and what it isn't. So first of all, this is the summary. The US EPA had proposed and actually then filed a consent decree with the federal court, along with Ohio EPA, who's also on board of this. Something, they wanted a consent decree, Lakewood under consent decree since about 2006. But basically, we've been working on saying we don't want a consent decree just to have one. We want to have one that's built around what we know we're going to do. And all this time, we've been doing things, but we've also been learning about the system and figuring out the plan. Finally, at the end of this, you may remember, we'll talk about it. In 2018, we came up with the integrated wet weather improvement plan. It's on the website. That was our adopted plan. It was almost 5 years ago to the day that City Council approved that plan. And the consent decree is built around that plan. The consent decree says, okay, Lakewood, you've set out what you want to do. You know these are the projects you want to do in the order and the timing you want to do them. We're going to just put this regulatory contract, is really what a consent decree is. We're going to put this on top of your plan as an extra backstop just to make sure you do what you're doing. But we have confidence that you know what you're going to do because of what you've been doing all these years. So the consent decree that's in the federal court has the same schedule, the same spending, the same as we proposed for ourselves and adopted in 2018. It actually builds in a pause that we didn't give ourselves at the end of 2031 to figure out what the right schedule is for the remaining projects that we're going to do. So we can look at economically where things are, technologically where things are, and what the data tell us, whether the projects we have in our plan are the right ones and in the right sequence. So, and it also provides some protection, legal protection, if you have a consent decree under the Clean Water Act from having some other lawsuit come in and try to force us to do other things out of sequence. This is, as Chris mentioned, this is the project team's been working on this for a long time. Some of us for like 15 years. We've had a great team, and these are some national leaders. Andy Lucas is here from Brown and Caldwell. He's a national expert on these issues. Mark Delisio has worked endlessly for CT Consultants in modeling and running this program. And these are people who are very well respected by US EPA and Ohio EPA. It's part of what has given a lot of credence to the plan that we all adopted, that and the public participation that we've had. So working closely with the city administration over these years, we came together with something that's really kind of a national model for communities our size. So what is a consent decree? You may have been asked yourself that question. I mentioned it 12 times already, but what is a consent decree? A consent decree in this context is like a regulatory contract to get into compliance. So a regulatory agency looks at an entity that has to get in compliance with some law and says, we're going to agree with you that these are the steps you're going to take to get toward compliance. It's judicially enforceable, though. So they file a lawsuit so that that agreement can be enforced by the court if something goes off schedule, or if there's a dispute, the court can resolve it without filing a separate lawsuit to say you're violating the law and have these findings. It's all set out in what's called a consent decree. So the consent part is we agreed to it. We as a city, as a regulated entity, agree with the regulators, here are the steps we're going to take. The order part is from the court, so that the court retains jurisdiction on that. So that's what it has. In this context, there's usually a civil penalty. We paid a civil penalty, or are paying a civil penalty, required to within this month, partly to US EPA, part of it to Ohio EPA. That resolves all past violations. So basically, one way to look at it is if, the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972 and we had overflows that were not in compliance, and we paid a total of $100,000 in penalty that wipes all those out, that's $2,000 a year, basically, and those are all gone. Those violations are ended. So what what Ohio EPA have told us, this isn't an enforcement matter where they're angry because Lakewood hasn't done anything. This is, we're checking a box here, because if you pay a penalty and you have a consent decree, that's when you get that protection against some third-party suit. The integrated planning was something that we've talked about, and Lakewood's plan is part of the leader on that. At one point, we were thinking at some point we could have not a consent decree and just have this under our permit. That hasn't matured with the regulatory agencies the same way, so we've followed their current policies, which are long-term policies of having a consent decree. Again, one of the things that we were able to show, one of the things that EPA recognized early on and told the federal court this, is that Lakewood has a unique sewer system. It would just, by function of the time that Lakewood was built and how it was built, we have this two-pipe system, these over-under sewers, that never were intended when they were built to go to a treatment plant. They just discharged into the lake. The idea of the two pipes was that the sanitary pipe was just to move waste away from houses, so odors couldn't be a problem. Today, and shortly after all of our sewers were built, you know, sanitary sewers have to go to a treatment plant. But that was not the case when Lakewood was built. In fact, about a quarter of our city is a single pipe combined sewer. That was state of the art when Lakewood started being built. It was just one pipe. And it was intended to overflow in heavy rain because there was no treatment for it. The solution to pollution was dilution. That was the public health approach at the time. And what's happened over time is Lakewood has built an Interceptor, knitted this together, has an outstanding wastewater treatment plant, but the unique sewers, the over-under sewers and how they fit together is unlike other places. That's what EPA recognizes. And so that's why we have a consent decree. It's a little bit different than most places. This is just a schematic of how our sewers work. The bottom southwest corner of the city goes directly towards Madison and Riverside, and then down Riverside and comes across there where it overflows at that point. The rest of the city flows north eventually to the Interceptor that we're going to talk more about, and comes around under West Clifton and gets down to the plant where it gets treated. Overwhelmingly, and most times, I think it's already something like 95% of all the waste on an annual basis in Lakewood gets treated at the wastewater plant. In big events, this old system that was intended to overflows a mixture of waste and stormwater. This graph is from 2018 when we did we had the public meetings, and this was when we were putting the plan together for our IWWIP. And what it shows you there is this at the time. This doesn't include the improvements we've made since this, but the size of the dot is the volume of the overflow that happens. The color, the more red it is the concentration of pollutants, whether there are more pollutants. And then it's listed there as activations. How many times in a modeled typical year does it go off? And so this is what we showed the Lakewood community, and when people prioritize projects, they were to get those big red dots first. And that's what we put in our plan, and that's what's in the consent decree. I just want to point to one example of how far we've come already since 2018. Right up there by Lakewood Park, you see the one just to the east of Lakewood Park. It says 82 activations. Because of the project the city did in integrating the street with stormwater and with new water lines on Lake Avenue. Remember that two halves were torn up for 2 years. Those 82 activations are now down to 1 or 2 per year. Because we had this plan, our other work took care of. We got 2 for 1, if you will. We got compliance and better performance because we knew what work we wanted to do, and we're able to put that into a street project. This is the plan that's on the website, and this is what it's built around and has our schedule. It's available there. It's been adopted by City Council, like I said. I think it was this week in February of 2019, I guess it was. And it's the first in Ohio to be a fully integrated plan. Ohio EPA will tell you that. In fact, Lakewood's been asked, and we've presented to both a workshop that Ohio EPA convened and one nationally that US EPA convened. They asked us to tell communities our size how to do integrated planning, why it works, what the benefits are. So Lakewood's been a model for that. Again, what we approved for ourselves in 2019 and what this consent decree really doesn't add new obligations. It's what we did for ourselves. If you look, it's the same projects under the same schedule. Some of it specified the size of some of the storage we're going to build with more particularity because we talked to EPA about that. It adds a sampling pilot project. Is kind of one of the first in the country to see if there's a better way to measure how effective our projects are. We're going to see how that works out after these first 10 years. And it builds in this pause then. We didn't give ourselves a pause under the plan to stop in 2031. We had work all the way through. EPA and what we negotiated all has us plan that in 2031 we complete the last of the big projects that you saw there, and then we take 2 years, we do some post-construction monitoring, and we look at what our finances are at that time, as well as what technology is telling us to see, okay, let's plan the rest of these under the right schedule and the right sequence. This is from the gentleman at the top is now retired, but he said, this is not your father's consent decree. You do consent decrees for decades. He spent 30 years doing consent decrees. This Lakewood consent decree is pretty particular in that it's built around an integrated plan, and it's really focused. It's not really broad. A lot of them are very broad, requiring basically cities that have been recalcitrant and not performing to come into compliance on everything. This is really focused on doing the projects we said we're going to do. So basically, the regulars have confidence that Lakewood knows what to do and how to get things done. We've demonstrated that over this whole time, and that's what the consent decree tells us to do. Keep doing what we're doing. There are risks and uncertainty. You know, this doesn't solve every sewer issue that we had. We found it with the Interceptor. The Interceptor needed attention, and you're going to hear about it like immediately. And so that came in there. It was something that was going to be somewhere in the long-term plan. Its condition said we have to do something now. There's, of course, long-term questions about what are some ultimate points of compliance. We're going to figure those out in 2033. There's always the risks of any construction project or any planning that you do that you're forecasting out 10 years. And so is inflation going to be high for, for 10 years? Is it going to be high for 4 years? Is it going to come down next year? Those are some of the risks of the costs and the timing that we have in there. But we have the ability to work that out. Council passed a resolution to approve the consent decree and directed the mayor to sign it back in, I guess it was October 3rd. It was this fall when it was ultimately all signed. I think it was a September 26th meeting that council approved it. City signed it and also directed some updating of the plan to conform to the consent decree with the minor changes. This was the process that went to approval. So the way it worked, we got the filing of the consent decree in October. We got a whole bunch of press. We got a little misinformation. But the fact of the matter is we got this put in front of the court, and it was set up for public comment. They have a public comment period. There were no comments entered. A lot of controversial consent decrees where people have been fighting over stuff get a lot of public comments. There was no public comment. And when the public comment period closed, the Department of Justice moved for entry of the consent decree by the court, and the court had a status conference just on January 30th, and Judge Oliver was very happy with where things are going, and on January 31st, he signed it, which made it effective and operative. So we now have an effective consent decree. So that is what a consent decree is, a little bit of what it isn't. It's not a penalty in its own right. It wasn't punishment that we're doing $84 million worth of projects. We said we were going to do $84 million worth of projects, and under that schedule. All the projects that are laid out there were what we said we were going to do. And so Mark Papke now is going to give a little bit of update as to the specifics on some of those projects and where some of the dollars are going to environmental improvement here in Lakewood. Mark.
Thanks, Lou. I'm going to grab the mouse here real quick. Good evening. We've already started on these partial consent decree projects. Those namely are dealing with CSO 002, 052, 059, as well as complying by doing some sewer lining each year and other IWIP improvements. So we're going to talk about the status and where we're at with those. So CSO 002 was the first one that we saw in one of our NPDES permits that gave us a timeline to complete the project. So it's down by the wastewater treatment plant, and ultimately what the high rate treatment system does is basically it treats a drop of water, CSO water, in 20 minutes versus going through the whole wastewater treatment plant, which basically takes a drop of water about 24 hours to get fully treated. So the project started in 2018 with the construction, and we started the HRT up in April of 2022. Thus far, we've treated 35 million gallons of CSO water, and basically have limited the activations at CSO 002 to virtually nothing in 2022. We're in the commissioning phase of that and dialing it in, and it's working quite well. Okay. Yeah. So CSO is a combined sewer overflow, and the HRT is a high-rate treatment system facility.
Thanks for asking that question. I was going to have him do exactly that, so I appreciate it.
So our next project is CSO 052, and basically, if you saw that graph that Lou had up before, it kind of showed that the southwest quadrant of the city has its own drainage area, and this is known as CSO 052. It's a rather large area, 588 acres, and it goes to the wastewater treatment plant, but whenever the system can't handle the water there, it's discharged right to the Rocky River. And this was the next high priority project that, you know, through our task force, through public comment, that this was the next highest priority CSO that needed to be addressed. So basically, during normal flows, all the water in sewage is coming down here and normally comes along Riverside to West Clifton and then over to the wastewater treatment plant for treatment. And basically, at the wastewater treatment plant, when we can't take on that much flow, it basically comes out here to the Rocky River. So currently, we are planning on installing a 6.2 million gallon storage tank down at the wastewater treatment plant. And basically what's going to do is going to take those flows, instead of going out to the river, it's going to go to a diversion structure and then over to that tank. And then once the rain event has subsided and the plant has capacity, the storage tank will be drained for full treatment at the wastewater treatment plant. So the project schedule, we've completed the flow monitoring and pollutant sampling. The preliminary engineering and basis of design report is 95% complete, and we are starting the final design and permitting that should be completed in June of 25. We're planning for construction to commence in January of 2026, and our construction being completed in January of 2029. The estimated cost right now at the preliminary engineering stage is $22 million for that project. And with adding in the tank at the wastewater treatment plant site, basically that's where the current animal shelter is. So Right now, our intent is to move the animal shelter over to by the refuse site that's currently being expanded and we're working on, but basically we'll be getting that animal shelter built there once we demolish the existing refuse building. The next priority after 052 is 059. We've positioned ourselves by purchasing a property close to the actual CSO. Basically, 059, you can see with the laser pointer here, this is the actual area along the Interceptor where when it becomes overwhelmed, that's the point of discharge, and there's a pipe that comes out and discharges here to the lake that's by the Carlisle there. And we've recently purchased this property here that's adjacent to the point of discharge. We ran a lot of construction cost estimates and determined that we could save $3 million in construction cost versus the original planned site at Cove. The property will be split to retain what is needed for the underground storage tank there, and we'll sell off the remainder, which would include preserving that historical structure which the previous picture has. It's a beautiful historic house here in Lakewood. It's closer to the overflow point. It has power there and water utilities, and construction's anticipated in 2030. So the project schedule for that really will be kicking off in June of 25, getting the flow monitoring and pollutant sampling, working on final design and permitting in July of 26, and then starting construction in June of 2030, and will be completed in January of 2032. Water and sewer projects that we're working on. So as a part of the IWIP, there's strategic areas where we are going to be doing manhole separations, and I'll show you a little bit about that. But you can just see, you know, the magnitude that it takes for us to do these manhole separations. It takes up a good chunk of the street. And a lot of these are in residential neighborhoods. So we are doing a lot of public outreach on these projects. And we ask, you know, the residents and that just to be patient. We're, you know, trying to take care of, trying to solve some problems from, you know, the early 1900s and improve the infrastructure. So with our water and sewer projects, as I was previously, from the previous slide, these are the manholes that are getting separated. We are lining the sanitary sewer main, and that helps reduce the amount of groundwater and I&I getting into the system, which is helps reduce the amount of overflows. And then we're adding in this new sewer, we're bumping the storm out, and then with those projects, we're lining in the right-of-way the sanitary lateral and providing new test tees, and then also for the storm, we're removing the P-traps and providing a new test tee there. And then this shows our new water main that we include with these projects. So we're really trying to do like a complete street, so that once we hit the streets that we're, you know, putting in a new water main, we're getting all this infrastructure done and preparing that street so we don't have to come back 10 years later and rip it up. There are some areas though that, you know, for instance, Gladys, that's under construction right now. We weren't able to separate the sewers at this time because other IWIP projects have to be done ahead of that so that we don't negatively impact basements with water. So projects that already been completed is Lauderdale. That was done, completed in 21 and 22. And then Andrews and Gladys, which is currently under construction. And then upcoming, we have Parkwood. The design is completed and we're planning to go to bid here in the spring. Lewis Drive we're working on between Franklin and Detroit. We've completed flow metering and the basis of design, and final design is just starting actually this month. The Interceptor Rehabilitation Project. So as Lou was talking before, the Interceptor here was originally built between 1918 to 1940. It carries 77% of the city's sanitary and combined sewer flows to it. It's approximately 20,100 feet in length. At the east end here over at West 117, it's approximately 20 feet deep, and it stays relatively between 20 and about 30 feet till we get to the intersection here at Clifton and West Clifton, where then it really starts diving down where it meets at the wastewater treatment plant. We're 90 feet deep. There are currently 34 manholes that are along the Interceptor. And the proposed plan is to slip line the Interceptor. And basically what that entails is putting in a glass reinforced liner that's the shape of an egg, and basically pushing that into place and then grouting in between the existing pipe and the new pipe so that it has full strength. With that project, we've identified 12 access shafts in order to install the liner, and they're variously placed strategically along the Interceptor route. With that project, we'll have a lot of utility temporary relocations at the shafts. There's going to be some traffic pattern changes there. And each shaft, we're approximately thinking that it's going to take approximately 3 to 4 months to complete. And we'll be rehabbing these existing manholes. And the big thing with this project is a communications plan. We have put that together. We have a team that just works totally on the communication plan. We do have a website for the project as well. But it's a pretty massive undertaking. The project is approximately $26 million to completely rehabilitate the Interceptor. Our bid opening is scheduled for March 9th. We're hoping to have the contract awarded in April, and we think that it's going to take approximately 2 years to complete. The construction costs are $23 million. Our funding sources are the ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act funds that we received, as well as we have funding from the Ohio Public Works Commission. You can view the project's website page that has a lot of details further of the project, and it'll actually keep a running total as we're completing work. We'll be updating that. So we encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested. And then I'll kick it back over to you, Lou.
You can go to the next slide, please. So part of what you can see, these are really significant, massive projects. This is kind of a program on the scale of when we rebuild all the schools in Lakewood. It took many, many years, and it took a community effort and support for it. And it's going to be on that scale, and it's going to take decades to do it. I work with a lot of communities around the country. Very few of them have this kind of public engagement and support. So what's really important to the sustaining this, and what frankly EPA and Ohio EPA saw, is that the Lakewood community is actively involved in the public meetings we've had, in the communication that we've had. So one of the things the city continues to want is to not have rumors or not have social media define things, but to get direct information. So there's information available on the website, and there's ways, you know, to comment and to ask questions, so we don't leave a vacuum that people don't understand what's going on. This is going to take a sustained effort. It's going to take a lot of investment. The city does an outstanding job, better than most, in getting non-local dollars to supplement the local tax dollars that are being spent on this. The ARPA fund commitment was something that's really really significant, and was a model for some other local communities to follow. Said, see, look what Lakewood's doing. They're putting their money where they can save long-term costs from borrowing money right into their sewers, because they know they have to spend money on it, as well as getting state dollars from infrastructure dollars. So, you know, it's a testament to Lakewood that you all here tonight, or anybody who's watching this after the fact are here, that people are interested in rebuilding their communities. That's what keeps it going. So if you have comments, if you have questions, the city really wants to hear about it, because we have a lot of information. We have really expert people on board, and they're willing to talk. And with that, I think we can take any comments or questions that you have tonight, and if you raise your hand, we're glad to answer anything. We'll have to repeat it so that people who aren't here can hear what the question is on the recording, but glad to have any comments or questions that you have. Yes, sir.
There was a public notice in the paper about 2 weeks ago for a bid of $21 million. I don't know what that was for.
So the question, Mark, you want to handle the question about the public notice for the bid of a $21 million project? What was that for?
Yes, that was for our Lakewood Interceptor project, which we just spoke about, that has the March 9th bid opening. Our engineer's estimates $21 million, but we always put in a 10% contingency with our projects. So there'll be a $2 million contingency fee. Just, you know, with Lakewood, when we start digging, we start finding a lot of things that we don't know were there. The plans from, you know, the early 1900s, just basically, you know, they don't have much in the way of like where sewers were connected or anything. They're very, very, very basic. So we always plan a 10% contingency.
And, you know, it's the same as with, you open up a wall in a Lakewood house, as you well know, you don't know what you're going to see behind there. You don't know what was the original construction and, you know, what that person did. You don't know what somebody's done after the fact. Unfortunately, our unique sewer system has its own idiosyncrasies that we have to account for. And then there's just the, you know, in any project you have to estimate. We talked about inflation and availability of things can change over time. You plan now for what something's going to cost 3 or 5 years from now. So, question?
In the Interceptor, is that the source of where most of these spill clouds are happening?
That's a good question. So the question is the Interceptor itself where most of our overflows come from? And the fact is it's not. It's, we talked at the beginning about CSO 002, and that is like the bottom end of the Interceptor. That was our biggest overflow because it was everything that could get to the interceptor that couldn't get through the plant. Most of our overflows aren't directly off the interceptor, they're before they can get into the interceptor. So they're the local collection. So we talked about CSO 052, and that's up at the higher level. What can't get down through Riverside goes down a separate pipe and down directly to the river. It never makes the interceptor. CSO 059, which is by the Gold Coast and the property that we talked about, Mark talked about, that overflow is on the interceptor, right? Or is it right close to it?
Yes, it is, at 059, that's correct.
Yeah. But of all the circles that we had up there, most of them aren't on the interceptor. They're in local sewers. So that's why, in addition to rebuilding an interceptor that needs work so it can last the next 100 years, we also have to redo parts of the system so it can efficiently and fully get into the interceptor. That's the idea. And some of those storage facilities we anticipate the interceptor won't be able to take it in a big storm, so they'll hold it until the interceptor and the plant have capacity.
Did I hear correctly that the storage that's in the Gold Coast area, that house,
Mhm.
that was what was initially thought to be the storage center under the community, and that
Correct.
to be financial.
So the question is, the now contemplated storage at the preserved house, the Maple Cliff, what's the Cliff House? Something that has a name. Call it the Hot in Cleveland House sometimes because it was on the TV show. So that house has been acquired. One, to preserve it as a historic structure. It is absolutely stunning. But two, that is closer to the actual overflow. So when we actually acquired the Cove site in part to do storage there, EPA was impressed because that was available at a very good price, and we knew if we had under somebody's orders, like a consent decree, that we had to acquire property and we didn't have a bird in hand, we'd be really over a barrel finding it. So we took the advantage of the multi-purposes of Cove Church and to be able to put storage there. As Mark talked about in his presentation, it's about $3 million cheaper to not go to the Cove site and go to this one that's closer, because you don't have to do the pumping and all the work. You don't have to tear up Lake Avenue again. You don't have all that extra infrastructure and pumping to deal with that. So we grabbed Cove as a bird in the hand. That was part of the issue, so that we couldn't get closed out or have to do eminent domain or something expensive. Always hoping that a better site might come available, and it did. So it's a win-win-win for the city because you get to preserve the structure, you save money, and you have less disruption. Question? Mm-hmm. So the planning department's looking at it now, but the lot will be subdivided. The question is, what are we going to do to the house to preserve it? And there'll be a historic conditions, historic landmark, I believe, and some other things, protections put on that main house, so that there's been a lot of investment in that house to preserve it as it is. And so with those protections on the city owning it, the city is evaluating what it'll do. One option, it could be to sell it then to somebody else, but with those protections, it would prohibit a new owner from either knocking it down and trying to build something else there, or subdividing it, or those things. So that's all being considered right now, but the city has a lot of tools in the toolbox and looking at it right now, what's the best option. Sure. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
So, I want to talk about two things. One is this new storage thing, which is great. I think that, first of all, I live on Summit. You guys had a great discussion. Mark, thank you very much. Communicating with us for 18 months. You did a great job. None of us residents complain about the work that's done by this. It was totally professional. But not then you've informed us now that we're going to have a huge bigger hole for at least a couple of months, maybe 3 to 4. I don't know
Well, you hold on to that one, so let me repeat it for the people who are watching this subsequently, and we'll let Mark answer that one. It is a sewer project, and you know, the industry knows things to do about that. But the first part is, she congratulated or thanked you for your professionalism on the great work that you did on Summit, and then her very real concerns about now a 3 to 4 month access shaft project that may emanate odors. What are some of the things that the city and contractors are able to do or anticipate to make sure that, you know, that's not a recurring situation?
So we have put provisions in the contract that would require the contractor to basically cover the hole during non-working hours in order to reduce the amount of odors, you know, during non-working hours. Obviously, when they're working and they get down to the Interceptor, you know, we know that there's going to be odors. There's no getting around it. So we are working with the contractor that comes on board, but there's other ways possibly that we can help minimize that. We're going to work with the contractor and their team to try to reduce that impact to the neighborhood.
There are, and I don't know if any of our experts here know of it, but I know the wastewater treatment plants often have different odor suppression things that they can use. So this is all going to be evaluated with the contractor. It's part of the bid that's out that they have to look into those and basically utilize best practices. You had a second question? If that's it.
I really don't have, I applaud you for reconstructing the sewers. I think that's a great thing. My other question is more current, because I am actually more concerned about what goes through Lakewood on that trail. And the fact that you have, now are considering building a big area to hold, you know, wastewater, if I could call it that. Is that something that you consider part of the project of something like what happened in an area that if something derailed in Lakewood, we can flow it to some substation or this treatment plant or, you know, contaminate the community? I kind of think that if you're already designing it, maybe you could think about that now opposed to, you know, having to retrofit it. You know, I thought that was a pretty significant thing that happened.
Sure.
My God.
So if I can, the question is there been any consideration of, you know, in light of the rail derailment, of how the sewer system could handle that, et cetera? I think you've actually hit on something really important. First of all, I'll just offer this and I'll turn it over to you guys. In that situation, you want things to go to your sewer system, right? You don't want them to go to the waters. You want them to go to the sewer system. And all this storage that we're putting in also includes something that we don't have. No one would have dreamed of it 100 years ago when this was built, which is a whole lot more control and sensors as to what our water levels are, where things are. A lot of these facilities will have gates on them in the storage because it has to hold it until we know there's capacity at the plant. So in the event that a dry day, something like that happened, you would want things to go not into the lake, but into our sewer system. The question of, is this being designed for, and these are being designed for big storm wet weather, like the biggest storms that we have. So unless we're in the middle of the biggest storm, at the same time something like that would happen, it would, you know, there would be capacity for what you posit there. In an event like that, the storm sewer would have more capacity to hold things, or I should say, the system would have the ability. You know, the first things that they do in a derailment like that is they go out and they block off the storm sewers. So you take out the avenues that go directly to water resources. And I'm certain that, I know the firm that's out there working in East Palestine, I'm certain that's the very first thing they did, along with making sure it was safe enough to be there given the cargo that was there. So I think it's a good question. I think this updating the infrastructure is really going to benefit overall things like that. It's, you know, on multiple levels, it's going to be better for our water resources. And I'm going to ask you guys if you got anything else.
Yeah, and to follow up with your question, in regards to the derailment in East Palestine. I have been in contact with the Northeast Ohio Director of the EPA in regards to concerns with the city of Lakewood, and I was rest assured that we do not have any concerns at this time with the city of Lakewood in regards to water quality or air quality.
I'm not worried about it here, I'm worried that it happened here.
Yeah, and
You know, how can we protect the lake, how can we protect our community from, you know, overall?
of course, fully understood. And I do know that the fire department here does have a plan in place. Ironically, they went through a similar simulation of a train derailment prior to East Palestine with some surrounding communities to address that exact situation, and ironically, it happened soon after. So they do have an emergency response process in place for if something like that were to happen.
It's also worth noting, we didn't list all the progress that's been made in some of these overflows that we have. For example, on the Rocky River, which we've identified as the more vulnerable of our water resources. The lake is a lot of water. The river, is lower flow. Well, we've already gotten rid of, there were 3 overflows from the community into the Rocky River. One we've eliminated, one we've controlled to 0 in a typical year, so it would take a very big event to go off. And the third one is the next project that we're going to do. So by 2030, when that big project's there, the Rocky River will be as protected as it's been since Lakewood started to be built. It'll be, and then that's why we've identified where the pollutants are coming out at the biggest concentration and where our dollars are going to make the most benefit soonest. So again, the Rocky River is already much better than it was 15 years ago because we've gotten rid of 2 of the 3 CSOs that are there. The fact of the matter is the Rocky River actually, we did some sampling early on, it's cleaner as it leaves Lakewood and enters Lake Erie than it is coming into Lakewood. But there's a lot of work going on upstream by other communities. So there's, watersheds have a bunch of influences. But here we are in Lakewood doing what we can with our infrastructure. Any questions? Question. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The road, a beach road, right. So just for everybody, the question is about the flooding of Beach Road. And that's a really good question. I talked about how this plan, our integrated plan and the consent decree specifically, and these projects we've talked about, they're focused on the sewer overflows. That's the regulatory part of being in compliance. That's not the sum total of all of our water issues. Every community has issues with erosion, with stormwater flow, with what water does. So I'm going to ask Mark Papke whether on Beach Road, are those public sewers? Is that a stormwater question that we have to address? What do you understand in that situation?
Well, Beach Road is a private road. It's not city right-of-way. We don't operate, maintain the sewers in that area. However, they've been doing improvements. The Clifton trustee group there, they've been phasing projects throughout the past several years, and I believe this spring they intend to put in some curb gutters and also resurface Beach Road according to the plans that were received.
Okay. So just Okay. Well, so the question is further about water. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Clean Water Act and what it is and what it does and its different programs. So Clean Water Act was passed 50 years ago in 1972, and it really was focused on pollutant discharges from plants and industry originally. There is a stormwater component that came in later in the 1990s, essentially 80s, and then it's a program that's been put in the 1990s. The authorities that we have a consent decree under and that we're talking about being regulated for those overflows are part of the original Clean Water Act, and those are the pollutants from sanitary sewage that can get into something. What you're talking about is a stormwater question, which is a separate regulatory part of it, and it doesn't even reach all the stormwater issues. We know now our biggest challenge to all of our water resources isn't so much from the end of pipe from a city sewer facility or an industrial facility. Those people have put in controls. It's the non-point sources of systems that get stormwater flow, that takes everything with it and puts it into our water resources. And there isn't as robust of a regulatory construct for that. For private property, it's not like the Clean Water Act, like Ohio EPA is going to come to somebody's house, typically, and just say, your stormwater is rolling off the Rocky River, you know, off the bank and in here. It's a much different legal construct. So your question is a good question. It's not within this consent decree and what we're talking about, the IWIP, but it is one of the factors that the city, when it's city pipes involved, that the city has to look at. That's a that's a question I would suggest the city has to look into, whether if they're city pipes and they're broken, if they're private pipes. There are private sewers in here. I don't know the facts of that, but that is exactly the question that you would have to look into to see who owns the pipes, basically, and and how they're operating. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, it's not within there.
We will certainly look into the issue. Now, I'm not quite sure if you were the one that I received an email from today on Beach Road, but yes, we will look into the issue. I'm sorry? Okay. Okay. Yeah, we'll look into the concerns that you've brought up today, and we'll certainly provide an answer and everything that's needed.
Well, I don't know not familiar with the circumstances and specific that. Well, I think in the interest of everyone else here, we're welcome to talk about it afterward, but we continue the conversation. What I heard from the city is they certainly want to continue the conversation. It's not something that I've been aware of. Not that I'm aware of. It's not a specified project under the consent decree that I'm aware of, but again, yeah. Yes, sir. The question is, are you closing down the interceptors to work on them, or how are you managing that flow during the reconstruction of the interceptor?
So the contractor will be able to work somewhat during live flows, and then they also do bypass within the pipe itself. So that'll be part of the contractor's means and methods, but there's not going to be any diversion of that, of those sewer flows.
As you might imagine, the people who do this around the country, there are lots of old interceptors that need work. In other cities, you hear about, you know, cars falling in where interceptors have failed underneath streets and things like that. We certainly want to avoid any possibility of that. But there's developed within the industry people who are specialized in being able to do this, know when to work, when not to work. You know, they've got to keep their people safe. So, good question. Yes, sir.
The investment will happen to our water rates and sewer rates over the next 10 years.
Yeah, the question is what's going to happen to water rates and sewer rates? And the obvious answer is they're going to go up, and that was laid out in the 2019 IWIP. The plan that we showed to EPA and council demonstrated with commitment when they approved it was 5 years of rate increases. And EPA saw that as a very significant increase. The plan, I think it's chapter 3 of the IWIP document that's there, called out to pay for this with rate increases that were slightly above inflation, but always on a foreseeable and consistent approach. So the idea that, because you need new money to do new work at some point. And there's also, you know, a lot of old asset management that has to be done. So what was called out in that plan was a projection of 4% rate increases per year, and going on through the life of the plan. Other communities do no rate increases, then have a big spike, and they have 15% increases, et cetera. We set out this plan and argued to EPA, and they recognized that it's really, really important for Lakewood to have a consistent way forward. We talked about a consistent commitment, but also consistent progress, so that we don't have spikes in our rate increases, so that, you know, our landlords in particular, but everybody who owns property, can foresee that it's going to be a steady but slow rise, as opposed to something coming out of the blue that might take away money they would otherwise invest into our buildings. So that's the plan. That's always been the plan when it was adopted by council and demonstrated with a 5-year commitment right at the start. You should expect something around, you know, slightly above inflation, I think. The plan called for 4% rate increases for years to come. It was already started. It started with the adoption of the plan. I mean, if you look at other, you know, nearby communities, Lakewood's rates, and it's also in that same chapter, but Lakewood's rates are about the middle of the pack, and that rate of growth will keep Lakewood in the middle at the most among our contemporaries or competitors, if you want to call them that way. So it's gonna. We talked about long-term commitment to rebuild the city. We're trying to do it in as cost-effective and organized a way as possible. We're trying to chase non-local dollars to keep rates as low as possible. That is the highest priority. And we got that pause now that's built in that if things sort of get out of kilter, we can adjust the next part of the schedule after 2033 based in part on economics, where we are, what the community can afford, where it fits within things. So we got that chance to look at that. Other communities have to have a consent decree that says you have to do all this stuff within 25 years, and no matter what happens in terms of economics and cost, you just pay for it. We've got a lot of flexibility. Yes, sir.
Bay Village and Rocky River have similar projects underway.
So the question is Bay Village and Rocky River. Those communities are all part of a collective that owns the plant in Rocky River. So Bay Village, Rocky River, Westlake, and Fairview Park each have a share of that. My understanding is, they all sort of pay for that based on what flow they contribute to it. What they're finding is they spend a lot of money on leaky old sewers, and there's benefits. Each of the communities are required on their own communities to tighten up their system with some of the projects Mark talked about in our system. So yes, those communities are going about tightening up their sewers. They don't have the unique sewer systems that we have necessarily, but like anywhere, they have old sewers that need to be renewed. So they're all looking at their different ways and different priorities as to how they have to update them. But one of the goals is to keep stormwater out of the sanitary, so you don't have, in their case, it's metered and they have to pay based on everything that gets to the plant. Ultimately, you'd like to have stormwater just go, not go to the plant and go, into where it's supposed to go, as much as it can. We have a system where we actually treat a lot of our stormwater, a lot of it, and that, ultimately is a benefit to our water resources. It's just kind of a complex way to do it. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much for coming. It really is a testament to Lakewood that you have these interests. Ladies, your questions, we want to keep talking about it, but I think with that, we want to thank you for your diligent attendance. If you have questions, send them along. If you hear somebody who has questions, send them along, and we're glad to hear it. And with that, I think we'll close this information session, and thank you all very much.